Question, the Honourable Member Rustico Emerald and the Opposition Whip.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Director of Provincial Planning told the Legislative Committee this fall that only 7 year-round staff are employed to handle all provincial planning across BEI. 7 qualified staff, Mr. Speaker, to review hundreds of applications for development and subdivision each year, answer questions, action information requests, and make sound decisions to protect public health and safety using sound planning principles. Mr. Speaker, question Minister of Communities, Land and Environment. Minister, how does this government expect 7 frontline staff to handle such a volume of work absent of reinforcement or resources?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Land and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And he's right, Mr. Speaker. The department is extremely busy, Mr. Speaker. Economic growth in Prince Edward Island is phenomenal, especially in rural PEI, Mr. Speaker, where the department works the most. We're up over 40%, Mr. Speaker, this year, and we're up 30% from last year. Whoa. Mr. Speaker, rural PEI is on a tear, I must say. And Mr. Speaker, we are advertising for more planning officers right away. We are short planning officers. One of the reasons we put through the new Planning Associations Act, Mr. Speaker, was to ensure that we have proper planners on Prince Edward Island with the proper knowledge and skills to do this. We are working hard, and we're out there trying to recruit right away, Mr. Speaker. So if anyone knows any good planners out there, send me their name.
Yeah. Great. The Honourable Member Rustico Emerald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people are tearing their hair out trying to get their permits approved, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, that's right. $107 million worth of development was permitted in 2016. And the Director of Provincial Planning told the committee, our pressures this year, this is back in 2016, have been about increased complexity in the proposals that people bring forward, in addition to a busy construction year overall. The more complex the development, the more areas there are for review. In addition, safety standard officers spend a lot of their time dealing with information requests. They're answering questions from potential land buyers and people trying to do their due diligence. This is what your provincial director said. The situation of staff shortages and lack of resources, Mr. Speaker, is leading to stress leave and huge delays in project development. So, Minister, you know about the problem. These resourcing challenges have been identified internally for at least over a year. So why are we heading back into another construction season without any solution to support your staff in place?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Land and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And Mr. Speaker, there is a process. We are governed by a union contract, Mr. Speaker, and we have to follow those procedures. We have to advertise internally first, Mr. Speaker, to see if we have people within the system that can do this. Once we find out or there's no one in the system that can do it, we go public. And that's the process we're in right now, Mr. Speaker. We're gone public. And one of the other things I've asked my staff to do, Mr. Speaker, is when applications come in, complex applications come in, meet with the community, have community meetings, meet with their neighbours. I know it's a new thing, Mr. Speaker, but I think developers should be telling their neighbourhoods around them what they're doing, and they should be acceptable to public meetings. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member Rustico Emerald.
So, Mr. Speaker, subdivision applications are taking upwards of 2 years for approvals, and building permits can drag out for 2 or 3 months or more. Mr. Speaker, this government's recent operating budget shows the minister is planning to spend less on provincial planning salaries this year than was spent last year, Mr. Speaker. Question to the Minister. Minister, why are you spending less on staff salaries this coming year? You're planning to do that when it appears that this division requires more staff and more salary dollars. At least plan to hire more people.
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Land and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I've instructed my department to go get these people as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker. I agree. Prince Edward Island is booming. And there's a lot of projects out there. There's a lot of complicated projects out there, Mr. Speaker. Subdivisions, institutional buildings going out, Mr. Speaker. Rural PEI is booming. We have to catch up, and we will catch up. The City of Charlottetown has gone out to tender for a new computer system for planning and permitting, Mr. Speaker. We've partnered with the City of Charlottetown to see if we can have one permitting system for all of Prince Edward Island. I think that would be a great idea, and that people could go in one area, get their permit no matter where on Prince Edward Island, Mr. Speaker. Cooperation is the game in this game, Mr. Speaker, and if we do it right, we do things better, and we make rural PEI better and all PEI better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Rustico Emerald.
So, Mr. Speaker, the director also told the committee we've been struggling to fill positions just based on the higher compensation in other jurisdictions. So it could be a matter of money, Mr. Speaker. But the one thing the minister did spend tax dollars on this year was a provincial planning organizational and operational review conducted by Newfoundland planner and consultant Mary Bishop. Question to the minister. Minister, will you publicly release a copy of this organizational and operational review?
Honourable Minister, Communities, Land and Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I thank the member for his questions, because it's an opportunity for us to explain to developers out there what we're trying to do, Mr. Speaker. We have the Minister of Rural and Regional Development, Mr. Speaker. He is just out there making sure that rural PEI is getting bigger and better all the time. We have the Minister of Immigration, Mr. Speaker, bringing people to rural PEI, Mr. Speaker. This is a new phenomenon, Mr. Speaker, and we need to catch up. And Mr. Speaker, I have ordered for a labour adjustment analysis to be done. A labour adjustment analysis, Mr. Speaker, is when you're in a certain grid and we can't find people in that grid and people are working above that grid, we have to increase the grid. So I've asked for labour adjustments to be done there, Mr. Speaker, so we can attract people to Prince Edward Island to assist us in growing Prince Edward Island and growing rural PEI. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.